Hi, I'm David Taub, and welcome to the Parshah Rabbit Hole, where I find something weird in the weekly Torah portion and follow it all the way down until it gets even weirder. This week's rabbit hole eventually gets us to animal psychology and peripheral vision.
As long as there's been something in the corner of your eye, or creaking in your house, or breathing under your bed, or voices through a wall.
But, as always, we have to get there. In this week's Torah portion, Parshas Seitzei, one of the things that we learn about is the mitzvah of shiluach hakan. If you come across a bird's nest with eggs or baby birds in it, and you have a hankering for a really gross omelet, you can't take the eggs or the baby birds while the mother bird is still there. Instead, it says, you must surely send away the mother and the offspring take for yourself, so that you will benefit and you will live long. So there's a lot of discussion about the reason behind this mitzvah, whether it's an expression of God's compassion to the mother bird, or a way to teach us how to be compassionate, or a way of protecting against the extinction of a species. There are a lot of fascinating ideas about this, and initially that's where I was going to get started, and that was going to be the rabbit hole. But those discussions often led to interesting ideas about how animals think and feel and perceive things, and that seemed weirder and more fun and just generally more rabbit-holey to me. So that's where this week's rabbit hole starts, with animals and how they think and feel, and if you're ready to see where that goes, let's dive in. Okay, let's start with Rambam, or Maimonides. In his Neurodiversity, or Guide for the Perplexed, he explains the reason for a similar mitzvah, not to slaughter an animal and its child on the same day. But he says that the same reasoning also applies for the sending away the mother bird mitzvah. He says the reason is to prevent the mother animal from seeing her child being killed, which would be very painful for her to witness. And he explains that the pain that an animal feels in this situation is no different than the pain that a human being would feel. Because the love and compassion that the mother animal has doesn't come from intellect, but from the faculty of imagination, which is present in most animals in the same exact way that it is in human beings. So there are a couple of things that caught my attention about this. First of all, the idea that the ability to imagine is what allows animals and sometimes people to feel love and compassion and emotional pain. I had some trouble making sense of that when I read it. I get that he's making a distinction between an intellectual perception and a non-intellectual perception, but it's hard for me to understand why that would be imagination. But the phrase that I'm translating as imagination is koyach hamedame, which comes from a root which every time I've seen it means to resemble or appear as. So it made sense to me that this phrase means imagination, and that's the way that I saw it translated in multiple translations. But there's another definition that I wasn't so familiar with, which is that it means irrational or illogical, in which case it could be saying that this love and compassion and emotional pain doesn't come from the faculty of intellect, but from some sort of completely non-intellectual, irrational thing, which I think could mean instinct, which honestly would make more sense. But there's another twist. The Guide for the Perplexed wasn't actually originally written in Hebrew. It was written in Judeo-Arabic. So koyach hamedame is actually already a translation of a Judeo-Arabic word. Specifically, it's Ibn Tibbon's translation, which as far as I know is the most popular and widely used Hebrew translation of Neurodiversity, the Guide for the Perplexed. But there's another translation by Al-Kharizi, which translates this mystery faculty as koyach hamachshava, which means the faculty of thought, which makes me think that it doesn't mean instinct. Also, it really doesn't even make sense to me to call love and compassion and emotional pain an instinct. Maybe, I don't know. For what it's worth, I gave the original Judeo-Arabic text to Google's Gemini AI, and it translated it as instinctive force. So now the real question is, did the AI use thought, imagination, or instinct to come up with that translation? Okay, moving on. The other thing that caught my attention in this was how Rambam talked about whatever this ability is as being something that animals and humans have in common. And it reminded me of a Gemara that I found once while researching one of my favorite topics, gremlins. It lists 3 ways that gremlins are like angels and 3 ways that they're like human beings. I'm not going to get into that right now because our focus is on animals. Animal! Which is what the next part of the Gemara deals with. It says that there are 3 ways that human beings are like angels and 3 ways that they are like animals. The 3 ways that people are like angels is that they have intelligence like angels, they walk upright like angels, and they speak in Hebrew like angels. And the three ways that humans are like animals is that they eat and drink like animals, they reproduce like animals, and they emit excrement like animals. Okay, so the ways in which humans are like animals are pretty straightforward to me. But the ways in which humans are like angels, I felt like that could use some explanation, but it wasn't easy to find. First of all, there wasn't any commentary at all on the statement that humans have intelligence like angels. But there's a midrash with a very similar list, and the Eitz Yosef explains this idea in his commentary on that midrash. He says that this is referring to a true intellectual recognition of one's creator through observation of the world, as opposed to an animal which only uses its cleverness to figure out how to get what it needs. The other thing that jumped out at me on this list was the speaking Hebrew thing, because not all people speak Hebrew.
Bart, I am not going to learn ancient Hebrew.
The Parshah points that out, and he explains that it only says specifically Hebrew here because that's the language that the angels speak. But really, it's just saying that people have speech and language, as do the angels, in contrast to animals which don't have the ability to speak. Okay, so I mentioned before that there's a midrash with an almost identical list of ways that people are like angels and ways that people are like animals. But that list has 4 things for each instead of 3. On the animal side, the extra thing is death. People die just like animals die. And again, that's pretty straightforward to me. But the 4th thing on the angel side is that human beings can see like angels can. And the midrash itself actually jumps on this one and immediately asks, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Animals can't see? And then it answers that people turn to the side. So what does that mean that human vision is different than animal vision because humans turn to the side? Rashi explains that this means peripheral vision, that human beings can see to the side without actually turning their heads, but an animal can't see to the side unless it actually turns its head to the side. So it's worth noting that according to any sources I saw when I googled animals peripheral vision, lots of animals have even better peripheral vision than people do. For example, dogs have about a 250-degree field of vision as compared to humans who have about 180 degrees. But dogs still do the head thing. When they look at something, they turn their heads. So maybe when Rashi says that they can't see to the side without turning their heads, it doesn't mean that their eyes aren't able to, but that they can't look to the side without turning their heads. They're compelled for whatever reason to turn their heads to look right at things. So maybe that's an answer. If you have a better answer, put it in the comments. But the peripheral vision thing isn't the only way that this midrash is explained. Yefet Hayar, which is a commentary on Midrash, gives a completely different explanation that ties everything on both the angel list and the animal list together. He says that the first 3 things on the animal list lead to the 4th thing, death. Basically, all of these physical needs and limitations make us mortal. On the other side, the first thing humans have in common with angels is standing, which he explains as not just meaning standing physically upright, but as standing eternally, remaining in existence forever, which human beings also have to some extent because of our souls. And this is caused by the 3 last things on the list. Human souls last forever because we can speak words of Torah and because we can think about God. So that's speech and intellect. And then for the seeing to the side thing, he explains that this means that we can see and understand all the sides of an idea. And through those 3 things, our souls stand forever. So I thought that was a really cool way of looking at this idea of seeing the sides. And obviously that's something that I'm really into. Okay, so there's another thing about the way animals think that I want to share with you. And this is actually something that I saw years ago when I was out of town for a wedding. And on Shabbos, instead of meeting people and schmoozing, I hid in the back with a book. And I stumbled upon an answer to a question that I had had for a very long time. But first, some background. In Tanya, which is the foundational work of the Chabad movement, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, explains how to be a Beinoni, a middle person, in contrast to a tzaddik on one side who doesn't have any desire to do bad things at all, or on the other side, a Rasha, a person who does sometimes do bad things. The Beinoni, as the Alter Rebbe explains it, does have the theoretical ability to want to do the wrong thing, but is able to overcome that and always do the right thing at every single moment in thought, speech, and action. And a big part of this whole thing is also the idea that people have both a godly soul and an animal soul. And the Beinoni is able to prioritize the godly soul over the animal soul. Okay, so one of the things that's always bugged me is this idea that we're supposed to attempt to never even think anything wrong.
So empty your heads. Empty your heads. Don't think of anything. We've only got one shot at this.
Which seems impossible, at least to me it does, because I often feel like my mind has a mind of its own. The Alter Rebbe addresses this and says that if a bad idea pops into a person's mind on its own, then they should push it away immediately, and as long as they don't entertain the thought willingly, then they're okay, and that counts as never doing anything bad in the realm of thought. But what's always bothered me is, what are the parameters of this? How do we quantify it? Exactly how long is immediately? Is it 100 milliseconds? 50 milliseconds? And also, how can I judge if I hung on to that idea willingly for a moment? Or if, I got rid of it right away? How do I know, did I choose to do that or not choose? So it's always seemed very vague to me and therefore difficult to implement.
I couldn't help it. It just popped in there.
Most people I've spoken to about it kind of shrug it off. Like, there's so much bigger stuff to deal with in life first. If all you've got left to work on is cutting down how many milliseconds it takes you to stop thinking about eating a cheeseburger, then you're in pretty good shape. But that wasn't good enough for me. I wanted an answer. So after many years of having that question, I stumbled upon the answer in another book of Hasidic teachings from the Alter Rebbe. He's speaking about that same idea, but he adds a detail that's not in Tanya. He says, don't worry if a hirhur, a notion or idea, pops into your head suddenly on its own, because that's not called machshava, thought. Because thought is in letters, thought is verbal. But this unwanted idea is from the animal soul, and animals don't have speech, and certainly not thought. But even though they don't have thought, they still react to things, and when they see food and they want it, they run after it because they picture the thing that they want and they run after it. So this answered my question. It's not a matter of milliseconds, it's nonverbal thought versus verbal thought, which to me makes a lot of sense in terms of being able to identify that line and choose not to cross it. But there's this part at the end that's kind of confusing. When an animal sees something they want, they imagine it in front of them and chase after it, which is weird because if they see it in front of them, why do they have to picture it in front of them? So a couple of days after I learned this, when I was in the airport on my way home, I was waiting at the gate, and my attention shifted for just a couple of seconds to the TV screens mounted on the ceiling. That, the ones that play just whatever random airport promos and whatever. And at the exact moment that I happened to be paying attention to those screens, there was a clip of Dr. Temple Grandin, who's an expert in animal science. And she was saying, animals think in pictures.
In order to understand animals and autism, art, and mathematics, you've got to get away from verbal language. Dogs and cats don't, and horses and cattle, they don't think in words. And there's a whole world of thought and experience that's not verbal. An animal's world is sensory-based.
And then that made it all come together for me. The reason why the animal pictures the thing that they want, even though they're looking right at it, is because they're thinking about it. But they don't think the words, I want to eat the Amazon guy. They just picture themselves eating the Amazon guy. But as I was finalizing the sources for this episode, I realized that this might also help us with that first thing that we looked at from Rambam, where he said that the love and compassion that an animal feels for its young doesn't come from intellect, but from something that we said could either mean imagination or thought or instinct. So based on that thing from the Alter Rebbe and the idea that animals think in pictures, it makes sense to me then to say that the animal's love and compassion and the feelings that it has for its child and the pain that it feels when it sees its child getting hurt comes from imagination, from picturing, because that's how they think. All right, that's it. That's the rabbit hole. As always, thoughts, ideas, questions, put it all in the comments. Thank you for following me down the rabbit hole. I hope you remember to shoo away the rabbit first.